let's see, the last several weeks, we have been doing something called shamatha. We've been talking about calm abiding arising from single pointedness, sustained voluntary attention, as some people call it, practicing with strengthening this muscle of concentration on things like breath or images or body and so on. Um, and this calm abiding is, in Tibetan Buddhism, is seen to be fundamental to cultivating wisdom in meditation practice. And the next stage, um, that it's sort of, it's not a linear thing, but rather it's another dimension of practice in the Mahamudra tradition. That's the Vajrayana tradition of meditation leading to profound wisdom, is called Vipashyana. This is a very interesting uh, kind of area of practice. So shamatha helps to deeply relax the body and open the mind and facilitate a stable, concentrative attention. And like the parable of the lute, I don't know if anybody's heard this. It's in the Buddhist canon, the parable of the lute. That our meditation practice is to be strung just right, like a well-tuned string on a lute, not too tight, not too loose. I love that. And so, as a guitar player, of course, I resonate with that. And so, it's a metaphor for our practice that we just balance effort and effortlessness just in just the right way. Anybody who is, I've also noticed this when I play tennis. There's if I'm returning a ball, that if everything is aligned beautifully, it's almost feels effortless, and the return goes very fast and very hard across to the other side, um, with very little effort. And in many ways, that feeling is like that of being in the zone. In tennis, they call it a sweet spot. I don't really resonate with that term too well, but it's kind of like a flow that yields a really positive result. That is largely the this kind of attunement, like a string of a lute. And shamatha allows us to do that. It's the cultivation of that finely tuned attention. And so that is when we practice mindfulness, we are using shamatha as the vehicle. So we're focusing on body and breath and feelings and thoughts. And in the Buddhist teaching of the four foundations of mindfulness, he has the fourth foundation is something called vipassana. Beyond meditating on body and feelings and mind, vipassana, which translates roughly into mental objects, but largely it's insights. Insights we gain by meditating on the first three, right? Insights. And what are those insights? This is the subject of vipassana, or in Mahayana Buddhism, Vipashyana, the vehicle of insight. And so there are largely in one form of Buddhism called the three marks of phenomena, and in the other form in Mahayana Buddhism they're called the four seals, and they're largely the same. Only Mahayana adds one more category, that of emptiness, and we'll talk about those in a moment. And largely, we're moving from making the mind workable in shamatha. We're making the mind workable, pliable, through attention, without forcing it, without trying to put an agenda into it, but we're actually working with the mind, using our conscious awareness, using mindful presence, and so on, so that it can be it can be sort of transformed, if you will, into a vehicle for insight. And that's what Vipashyana is all about. The next stage after shamatha becomes insight into the nature of that mind, insight into the nature of suffering. So I think this is one of the most intriguing teachings in Buddhism, because all the teachings are there within this framework. And basically, Tri Lakshana, which is the three marks of phenomena that we find in Theravada Buddhism, the more monastic form of Buddhism we find in Sri Lanka and Thailand and Myanmar and such. Um, the three marks of phenomena, all things that exist are subject to three things, three qualities. Number one, they're all impermanent, including us, right? So impermanence, anicca, universally true. All things are in constant change. And we can see this when we meditate on the mind. We see how the mind itself is constantly shifting and switching from one thought to another. Our very interior lives are so much more impermanent than they seem. The second category is dukkha, suffering, which pops up everywhere in Buddhism. And the reason that we suffer because of impermanence is that the things we want, the things we cling to, we will eventually they will dissipate. We will lose them. And that causes us grief, it causes us dissatisfaction. Clinging leading to dissatisfaction, first, second noble truth. But nonetheless, because of impermanence, or our belief in permanence, including states that are suffering states, I feel bad, I will always feel bad. That's not true. Because of impermanence, we will feel better. But nonetheless, it's that kind of mistaken view that all things are permanent, the things I like and the things I don't like. Either way, we suffer. So part of that is is recognizing the impermanent nature of things and not living a life where we're always grieving, but living a more meaningful life because things are impermanent. We can value them even more. They are precious, but then we must let them go as well. And that includes ourselves at some point. So we have anicca, which is impermanence. We have dukkha, which is discontentedness, suffering. And then we have a third quality that all things basically have no inherent self, or what we call non-self, anatta, or anatman. And things have no fundamental inherent existence that we can conceive. It doesn't mean they don't exist, but not in the way we believe them to exist, not in this permanent way. So even I, if I start pulling molecules away from myself, where do I find Christness in me? There's no Christness. There is an aggregate of things and processes and ego and no, well, not so much. No, of course, ego. I'm kidding. Um, there is there is all of these like things that identify kind of how the causes and conditions of who I appear to be in this life. But those will dissolve. Those will pass away, as will I. And so, Christness doesn't exist. I have fun with Christness anyway, but I'm not deceived in thinking that these are actual. This is actually me, my personality, and the things that maybe I enjoy doing, or I'm good at, or I'm bad at. The characteristics. They're ephemeral. So not to take them for granted, but also not to think that they will always be me. So anyway, so these teachings of three lakshana, or three marks, and yes, tri, same thing as English try, coming from the early Sanskrit, is the same, the prefix there. Now, Tibetan Buddhism, Mahayana, adds a fourth that we don't see in the other form, and that is emptiness, the truth of emptiness. What does that mean, right? This is the subject of several of the foundational Mahayana Buddhist texts on the nature of emptiness, such as the Heart Sutra, which we'll chant in a little bit. Gate gate paragate parasamgate bodhisvaha. Gone beyond, gone entirely beyond into the realm of awakening, and then offer this up. That's the meaning of that. Because our view has opened to seeing all things as they are, including ourselves. Consciousness is freed up, basically. And emptiness, as much as emptiness has been translated by scholars to mean, this word shunyata. Shunyata is the Sanskrit term, has been translated to mean emptiness, it's a very, very misleading term. Emptiness is very misleading in that sense because a lot of people take that to mean nothingness, and that's not what it means. Largely, it means such profound openness that there is this freedom of conceptual identification with anything. So it's profound openness. That's really more accurate for shunyata rather than emptiness. And what that means is that the underlying nature of who we are is fundamentally empty. We just don't know it. But it doesn't mean we're nothing. There is something there. There is bright, clear, luminous awareness. There is experience. But the second we try to put it into a package or think, this is me, this is it, poof, we lose it. Now, why would we want to go there? Why not just enjoy a life of ego, right? Because it's impermanent. So we don't want to live in delusion, and we don't want to be subject to attachments and aversions, and we want to feel free, and we want to feel nourished by this innermost sense of who we are and this luminosity, a blissful state. So what we might call it enlightened, but yeah, even if we try to put that in a box, we're going to get it wrong. Anyway, that can be the subject of another evening. So in the spirit of this, I'm going to read you. I kind of wanted to set this up before I read this this passage. We've been working our way through this incredibly lovely and large volume called Mahamudra and Related Instructions from the Karma Kagyu tradition of Buddhism. And I hope I set it up well enough because this Lama Shang, who we've been reading, talks about the nature of this empty sense, this experience of emptiness that is known as Dharmakaya in Buddhism. Dharmakaya, the body of truth, or what we might also call all-pervasive consciousness. The consciousness that is not just within my mind and within me, but is unifying all things largely. So how that is expressed within me, this is very central to Tibetan Buddhism. And you can't conceive of it. In many ways, Cliff, I sort of liken this to Karl Barth's negative theology that I studied when I was in divinity school. And I always, as a Buddhist, it always kind of struck me that, wow, this is like Buddhist theology in a way, you know? You can't conceive of it, but that doesn't mean it's not there. This notion of God as ineffable, as inconceivable, but knowable. Yeah. So anyway, so this is Lama Shang, who writes somewhere, I think in the 12th century, from northern India, southern Nepal. Worlds are formed within pure space and are destroyed by burning fire. Worlds are formed within pure space and are destroyed by burning fire, scattering winds, and so on. Although this destruction occurs throughout many incalculable eons, space remains unharmed, never altered, and neither increases nor decreases. There is darkness when the sun's primordial brightness is completely obscured by clouds, and there is brightness when the clouds vanish. Despite this apparent increase and decrease, it is impossible for the sun's essence to increase or decrease. The unchanging Dharmakaya, which is present in the same way, is nothing other than your own mind. The entire variety of samsara and nirvana arise in the mind. The sufferings of the world and its beings arise from the confusion caused by the erroneous delusion of not understanding your own mind. It is, in fact, immaterial, self knowing, and self illuminating. It is not a thing, it has no color, shape, or size. It isn't nothing. Through conditions, it appears as everything. It isn't permanent, it is empty by nature. It isn't non existent. Its nature is unchanging self illumination. It is not a self. When examined, it has no essence. It is not selfless. It is the great selfhood of freedom from elaboration. It is not the extremes. It has no fixation whatsoever. It is not the middle way. It is devoid of all dependency. It cannot be identified by an example's names and symbols. It has no example. It is like space. It is not words. It cannot be described by speech. It is not wordless. It is the cause of all expressions. If you understand this, words and terminology will not obscure. You will be unstained by the faults of words. The true nature of your own mind pervades all beings, including their afflictions, thoughts, aggregates, sensory elements, and all worlds, including their earth, stones, plants, and trees. In brief, it pervades everything without exception, including all inner and outer things. That pervasion is without the duality of pervader and pervaded. It is the manifestation of one single great identity. So it doesn't get much more Buddhist than that, I think.